Good evening and welcome to Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. I'm Nancy Miller, the creator of this podcast, and what you are about to hear is a short teaser for the latest bonus episode. As you may or may not know, Dead Sleep is 100% ad-free and listener-supported. That means it really does rely on you, the listener, to succeed. If you would like to ensure the success of this podcast and enjoy a subscriber-only bonus episode each month, please feel free to subscribe via Spotify, Patreon, and Apple Podcasts. Just a few dollars a month really does make a difference in covering the essential production costs in making this podcast. Thank you for supporting my work, and I hope my work supports you. You can enjoy a free month on Apple Podcasts and a free 7-day trial on Patreon. Thank you. And now, on to the teaser of the latest bonus episode. Good evening. This is Dead Sleep, True Crime for Bedtime. It's Nancy Miller here. Thank you so much for joining me. Tonight's episode is an offering you might call true crime origins. That is, unexpected stories that I would say helped inform true crime as a genre. Whatever we can do in true crime podcasts to put the emphasis on good writing and good storytelling, I'm all for it. And so in the past, I've featured writing by Edith Wharton, Shirley Jackson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, even Charles Dickens. These were fiction writers, very famous fiction writers, who also had interests in murder and serial killers and macabre interests that we all share. And tonight's author is a French writer from the 19th century, Emile Zola. Now, you likely know the name Emile Zola. He's probably most famous for Americans for writing the J'accuse letter. Years earlier, Zola became famous when he wrote a scandalous work of fiction that for many felt too vividly, chillingly real. A story of sex, lust, betrayal, murder. One that ends with a perfect film noir-style twist. A short story titled, ironically, A Love Story. That would later become the novel Thérese Raquin. Thérese Raquin is the main character, a young woman who, at a very young age, is adopted by her aunt, and her aunt engineers this girl's life to essentially function as both playmate and caretaker for her sickly son. His name is Camille. Thérese is the definition of a woman without agency, who is essentially ushered into a life and a marriage she never wanted, until she meets a charismatic young man. And soon their passions burn so strong, they conspire to murder Therese's husband, Camille, with, of course, unexpected consequences. Now, there were plenty of works of incredible fiction by French authors at that time, but what made Thérese Raquin so groundbreaking was Zola's style, something that would later be defined as French naturalism. The author, that's Zola, takes a kind of detached view of his characters. A style and level of detail and structure that's almost methodical. A murder that unfolds little by little, step by step. And again, this was a work of fiction, but you can absolutely trace a through line between Emile Zola's Thérese Raquin and Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Two writers who existed 100 years apart, but who shared an eye for meticulous detail and took an unflinching look at killers, their motives, and their victims. Zola also revealed the French public's fascination with murder and death. And there's a whole scene in Thérese Raquin that I think of often, one that takes place in the public morgue. And as Zola details in the book, it shows you how people would come and visit the morgue to look at the bodies as something they do on their lunch hour. So I suppose by comparison, falling asleep to true crime, maybe it's not quite as bad. It's worth noting that similar to what we did with Edith Wharton and Nathaniel Hawthorne, I am reading these works and editing things slightly for clarity. With Emile Zola, well, Thérese Raquin is a sprawling novel. And Zola, he could write 3 pages describing a radish. So I've used my best editorial judgment to streamline these excerpts to offer a compelling evening bedtime story and a compelling story of murder. One that happened in a fictional Paris nearly 200 years ago, but could just as easily be read in a headline today. Corey Richins, who was just convicted of murdering her husband, and Thérese Raquin, the fictional protagonist in tonight's story, they're not all that different. 2 young women of modest means who want more out of life. And they each determine, for whatever reason, the only way they can get more is through murder. And our version of this story begins in Paris, France, in the 1860s, which was, even that far back, a bustling global destination for art, cuisine, and culture. The iconic Eiffel Tower was still a decade or so away, but Paris was recently anointed as the City of Light, thanks to the newly installed gas-powered cast iron street lamps that gave the newly built buildings and boulevards a warm glow. And somewhere just off of the Seine is a little shop with an apartment up top. The occupants of the apartment are Madame, her son Camille, and Camille's slightly younger wife, Thérèse. And I will let Zola take it from here. As a rule, 2 women were seated behind the counter. The young woman with the grave profile, and an old lady who sat dozing with a smile on her countenance. The latter was about 60, and her fat, placid face looked white in the brightness of the lamp. A great tabby cat, crouching at a corner of the counter, watched her as she slept. Lower down, on a chair, a man of 30 sat reading or chatting in a subdued voice with the young woman. He was short, delicate, and in manner languid. With his fair hair devoid of luster, his sparse beard, his face covered with red blotches, he resembled a sickly, spoilt child arrived at manhood. Shortly before 10 o'clock that night, the old lady awoke. The shop was then closed, and all the family went upstairs to bed. The tabby cat followed the party, purring and rubbing its head against each bar of the banisters. The lodging above comprised 3 apartments. The staircase led to a dining room which also did duty as a drawing room. In a niche on the left stood a porcelain stove. Opposite, a sideboard. Then chairs were arranged along the walls, and a round table occupied the center. At the further end, a glazed partition concealed a dark kitchen. On each side of the dining room was a sleeping apartment. The old lady, after kissing her son and daughter-in-law, withdrew. The cat went to sleep on a chair in the kitchen. The married couple entered their room. The husband, who was always trembling with fever, went to bed, while the young woman opened the window to close the shuttered blinds. She remained there a few minutes, facing the great black wall. She cast a vague, wandering look upon this wall, and without a word, she, in her turn, went to bed in disdainful indifference. It was an arranged marriage, or perhaps the better term for it was engineered. When Thérese was just a little girl, her father, who was an army captain stationed in Algeria, returned to France with him in her arms. Her mother, he said, had died, and while he was the father, he couldn't raise her. So he asked his sister for help. She had a son around the same age as Thérese. So Madame Raquin took in the child as her son Camille's playmate and caretaker. As the two grew into young adults, Madame had resolved to make them husband and wife. She continued to treat her son as if he were at death's door, and she trembled when she happened to reflect that she would one day die herself and would leave him alone and suffering. In that contingency, she relied on Thérese, saying to herself that the young girl would be a vigilant guardian beside Camille. Her niece, with a tranquil manner, her mute devotedness, inspired her with unlimited confidence. She had seen Thérese at work and wished to give her to her son as a guardian angel. This marriage was a solution to the matter, foreseen and settled in her mind. The children knew for a long time that they were one day to marry. They had grown up with this idea, which had thus become familiar and natural to them. Madame Raquin had said, "We will wait until Thérese is 21." And so they waited patiently for her 21st birthday, without excitement and without a blush. Camille, whose blood had become impoverished by illness, had remained a little boy in the eyes of his cousin. He kissed her as he kissed his mother, by habit, without losing any of his egotistic tranquility. He looked upon her as an obliging comrade who helped him to amuse himself, and who, if occasion offered, prepared him an infusion. When playing with Thérese, when he held her in his arms, it was as if he had a boy to deal with. He experienced no thrill, and at these moments the idea had never occurred to him of planting a warm kiss on her lips as she struggled with a nervous laugh to free herself. The girl, Thérese, also seemed to have remained cold and indifferent. At times her great eyes rested on Camille and fixedly gazed at him with sovereign calm. Months and years passed by, and at length the day fixed for the marriage arrived. At night, Thérese, instead of going into her own room, which was on the left of the staircase, entered that of her cousin, which was on the right. This was all the change that occurred in her mode of life. The following day, after they were married, when the young couple came downstairs, Camille had still his sickly languidness, his righteous tranquility of an egotist. Thérese still maintained her gentle indifference and her restrained expression of frightful calmness. A week after the marriage, Camille distinctly told his mother that he intended to leave Vernon in the north of France to reside in Paris. Madame Raquin protested. She had arranged her mode of life and would not modify it in any way. Thereupon her son had a nervous attack and threatened to fall ill if she did not give way to his whim. "Never have I opposed you in your plans," said he. "I married my cousin. I took all the drugs you gave me. It is only natural now, when I have a desire of my own, that you should be of the same mind. We will move at the end of the month." Madame was unable to sleep all night. The decision Camille had come to her upset her way of living, and in despair, she sought to arrange another existence for herself and the married couple. Little by little, she recovered calm. She reflected that the young people might have children, and that her small fortune would not then suffice. It was necessary to earn money, to go into business again, to find lucrative occupation for Thérese. The next day, she became accustomed to the idea of moving and had arranged a plan for a new life. At lunch, she was quite happy. "This is what we will do," she said to her children. "I will go to Paris tomorrow. There I will look for a small mercery business for sale, and Thérese and myself will resume selling needles and cotton, which will give us something to do. You, Camille, will act as you like. You can either stroll about in the sun, or you can find some employment." Camille said he would find employment. Thérese was not consulted. She had always displayed such passive obedience that her aunt and husband no longer took the trouble to ask her opinion. She went where they went. She did what they did, without a complaint, without a reproach, without appearing even to be aware that she changed her place of residence. So all three moved to Paris. Madame Raquin found a little shop where she and Thérese worked each day, while Camille did find an office job where he spent most of his days. At their store, Thérese served the people with words that were ever the same, with a smile that appeared mechanically on her lips. It was Madame who displayed a more gossipy disposition. And to tell the truth, it was she who attracted and retained the customers. For 3 years, days followed days and resembled one another. Camille, at the office, his mother and his wife hardly ever left the shop. Thérese, residing in damp obscurity, in gloomy, crushing silence, saw life expand before her in all its nakedness, each night bringing the same cold couch, and each morn the same empty day. Her only friend was an orange tabby cat named Francois. Then, on a Thursday, her husband came home from his office administration job at the railway, and with him was a great fellow with square shoulders. His name was Laurent. Thérese had never seen such a man before. Laurent, who was tall and robust, with a florid complexion, astonished her. It was a feeling akin to admiration that she contemplated his low forehead planted with coarse black hair, his full cheeks, his red lips, his regular features of sanguineous beauty. For an instant, her eyes rested on his neck, a neck that was thick and short, fat and powerful. Then she became lost in the contemplation of his great hands, which he kept spread out on his knees. The fingers were square. The clenched fist must be enormous and would fell an ox. Laurent was a real son of a peasant, rather heavy in gait, with an arched back, movements that were slow and precise, and an obstinate, tranquil manner. One imagined his apparel concealed round and well-developed muscles and a body of thick, hard flesh. Glancing from his fists to his face, and experienced little shivers when her eyes fell on his bull-like neck. She would soon learn Laurent was 30 years old, and he was an aspiring artist. And he was, by all accounts, mediocre. But what he lacked in natural talent, Laurent made up for in temperament. He was a man who liked to live outside of society, enjoying life and avoiding its strict rules and social constraints. Thérese would soon fall for this man. He was the antithesis of the husband she was forced to spend her life with. Where Camille was weak and sick, Laurent was strong and indestructible. Perhaps spending time with him would help undo all of those wasted years being companion and caregiver to a man she couldn't stand. Soon, a love affair blossomed between the two. The attraction between Laurent and Thérese so passionate, they realized they were indeed in love. Laurent and Thérese, they had to be together. But it was impossible. Divorce was not an option. Besides, for Laurent, things were good. Madame Raquin had formed a motherly affection towards Laurent. She knew he was short of cash and indifferently nourished, that he slept in a garret, and she had told him once and for all that a seat would always be kept for him at their table. She liked this young fellow with that expansive feeling that old women display for people who come from their own part of the country, bringing with them memories of the past. The young man took full advantage of this hospitality. When Laurent was with Madame and Camille, the presence of Thérese did not embarrass him in the least. He treated the young woman with friendly familiarity, paying her commonplace compliments without a line of his face becoming disturbed. Camille laughed, and, as his wife confined herself to answering his friend in monosyllables, her husband firmly believed his best friend and his wife detested one another. One day, Camille even reproached Thérese with what he termed her coldness for Laurent. Laurent had everything he wanted. He had become the sweetheart of the woman, the friend of the husband, the spoiled child of the mother. Never had he enjoyed such a capital time. His position in the family struck him as quite natural. He was on the most friendly terms with Camille, in regard to whom he felt neither anger nor remorse. He was so sure of being prudent and calm that he did not even keep watch on his gestures and speech. The egotism he displayed in the enjoyment of his good fortune shielded him from any fault. The nature of the circumstances seemed to have made this woman for this man, and to have thrust one towards the other. The two together formed a powerful couple, allied. The one completed the other, and they mutually protected themselves. At night, at table, in the pale light of the lamp, one felt the strength of their union. At the sight of the heavy, smiling face of Laurent, opposite the mute, impenetrable mask of Thérese. Camille liked Laurent as much as he was capable of liking anybody, after the fashion of a contented egotist, and Laurent seemed to show him equal attachment. Between them there was an exchange of kind sentences, of obliging gestures, and thoughtful attentions. Madame, with placid countenance, contributed her peacefulness to the tranquility of the scene, which resembled a gathering of old friends who knew one another to the heart and confidently relied on the faith of their friendship. Thérese, motionless, peaceful like the others, observed this joy, this smiling depression of these people of the middle class. And in her heart, there was savage laughter, all her being jeered, but her face maintained its frigid rigidity. Oh, how she deceived these worthy people, and how delighted she was to deceive them with such triumphant impudence. Her sweetheart, at this moment, was like a person unknown to her, a comrade of her husband, a sort of simpleton and interloper concerning whom she had no need to concern herself. This atrocious comedy, these duperies of life, this comparison between the burning kisses in the daytime and the indifference played at night, gave new warmth to the blood of this young woman. At dinner, one night, by chance, when Madame and Camille went downstairs, Thérese bounded from her chair to silently and with brutal energy press her lips to those of her sweetheart, remaining thus breathless and choking until she heard the stairs creak. Then she briskly seated herself again and resumed her glum grimace, while Laurent calmly continued the interrupted conversation with Camille. It was like a rapid, blinding flash of lightning in a leaden sky. The sweethearts lived like this, in complete bliss, for 8 months. One day when Laurent and Thérese were together, he had a thought. It was of Camille. He wished him no harm, he said, but he really is too much in their way. And he wondered if Thérese, couldn't she get rid of him somehow, send him on a journey somewhere far away? Thérese nearly laughed. Him on a journey. Can you imagine a man like that would consent to travel? She knew there was only one journey from which he would never return. But she told Laurent, Camille will bury them all. People who are at their last breath never die, she said. Then there was a silence between them. Laurent finally broke the silence. If your husband were to die, Laurent said. If my husband were to die, repeated Thérese. We would marry, Laurent said, and have nothing more to fear. What a nice, gentle life it would be. Laurent said quietly, I was thinking that accidents happen daily, but a foot may slip, a tile may fall. You understand. In the latter event, the wind alone is guilty. Later, after Thérese left in a whirl, Laurent turned the same idea over and over in his head until daybreak. Previous to the visit of Thérese, the idea of murdering Camille had not occurred to him. He had spoken of the death of this man, urged to do so by the facts, irritated at the thought that he would be unable to meet his sweetheart any more. And it was thus that a new corner of his unconscious nature came to be revealed. Now that he was more calm, alone in the middle of a peaceful night, he studied the murder. The idea of death, blurted out in despair between a couple of kisses, returned implacable and keen. Racked by insomnia and unnerved by the visit of Thérese, he calculated the disadvantages and the advantages of his becoming an assassin. All his interests urged him to commit the crime. If Camille were dead, he would marry Thérese. He would inherit from Madame Raquin, resign from his job, and saunter about in the sun. He took pleasure in dreaming of this life of idleness. He saw himself with nothing to do, eating and sleeping. And when reality arose in the middle of his dream, he ran up against Camille and clenched his fists to knock him down. Laurent desired Thérèse. He wanted her for himself alone, to have her always within reach. If he failed to make the husband disappear, the woman would escape him. He would have eloped with her, carried her off somewhere, but then both would die of hunger. He risked less in killing the husband. There would be no scandal. He would simply push a man away to take his place. In his brutal logic of a peasant, Laurent found this method excellent and natural. He groveled on his bed, in perspiration, flat on his stomach with his face against the pillow, and he remained there breathless, stifling, seeing lines of fire pass along his closed eyelids. He asked himself, how would he kill Camille? Then, unable to breathe any more, he turned round, at a bound to resume his position on his back, and with his eyes wide open, received full in the face the puffs of cold air from the window, seeking in the stars, in the bluish square of sky, a piece of advice about murder, a plan of assassination. And he found nothing. As he had told his lady love, he was neither a child nor a fool. He wanted neither a dagger nor poison. What he sought was a subtle crime, one that could be accomplished without danger, a sort of sinister suffocation, without cries, without terror, a simple disappearance. But he had to be smart, practical. He was too cowardly, too voluptuous to risk his tranquility. If he killed, it would be for a calm and happy life. Little by little, slumber overcame him. Fatigued and appeased, he sank into a sort of gentle and uncertain torpor. As he fell asleep, he decided he would await a favorable opportunity, and his thoughts, fleeting further and further away, lulled him to rest with the murmur, I will kill him. I will kill him.